The city that vanished overnight. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that an entire civilization has vanished. Not a city, not a country, an empire, a powerful society, advanced, wealthy, dominant, gone. No survivors, no warning, no second chance. Just the sea. Now imagine that this civilization was said to be more powerful than any kingdom of its time. A civilization with massive temples, vast harbors, advanced engineering, a mighty navy that ruled the seas. A civilization that, according to an ancient story, disappeared in a single day and a single night. This is the story of Atlantis. For more than 2,000 years, Atlantis has haunted the human imagination. Some say it never existed. Others believe it was real. And a few are convinced it is still out there, hidden beneath the ocean. But what if Atlantis was not just a myth? What if it was not just a legend? What if it was a warning? Tonight, we are not chasing fantasy. We are following a story that comes from one of the greatest minds in human history, a story that has survived wars, empires, religions, and centuries of skepticism. A story that refuses to disappear. Because Atlantis is not just about a lost city, it is about power, pride, and collapse. According to the ancient account, Atlantis was not destroyed by enemies. It was not conquered. It was not defeated in battle. It destroyed itself. The story tells us that Atlantis became too powerful, too wealthy, too arrogant. And when its people forgot wisdom, balance, and humility, nature responded. The earth shook, the sea rose, and the city sank forever. Or so the story says. But here is where things become truly unsettling. This story was not written as a fairy tale. It was not presented as fiction. It was written as history. And it was told by a man whose influence still shapes philosophy, science, and political thought to this day. His name was Plato. Plato did not describe Atlantis as a vague dream. He gave details, precise details. He described its location, its size, its political system, its laws, its military power. He even described how it was destroyed, and he claimed that the story was already ancient even in his time. According to Plato, the story of Atlantis was over 9,000 years old, passed down through generations, preserved by priests, recorded as a true account of a real civilization. This is what makes Atlantis so difficult to ignore, because if Plato was lying, then why include so many details? And if he was telling the truth, then where is Atlantis now? That question has driven explorers to the bottom of the oceans. It has inspired archaeologists, historians, and conspiracy theorists. It has fueled books, movies, and endless debates. Some believe Atlantis lies beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Others point to the Mediterranean. Some claim it was near Spain. Others say it was Antarctica. A few even argue it was a lost global civilization wiped out by a prehistoric catastrophe. And yet, despite satellites, despite sonar, despite modern science, no one has found Atlantis, not conclusively, which leads us to the most uncomfortable possibility of all. What if Atlantis was never meant to be found? What if it was not a place, but a message? A message about civilization itself. About what happens when technological power grows faster than wisdom. About what happens when societies believe they are untouchable, invincible, immortal. History shows us that no civilization truly is. Empires rise, empires fall, sometimes slowly, sometimes suddenly. And according to Plato, Atlantis fell faster than any of them. One day it stood as the greatest power on earth. The next it was gone. No ruins above water, no survivors to tell the tale, only silence. and a story that survived when the city did not. Tonight, we begin the journey into that story, not to prove that Atlantis existed and not to dismiss it as a myth, but to understand why this story was told, why it endured, and why, after thousands of years, it still asks us the same question. If a civilization as powerful as Atlantis could disappear overnight, what does that say about ours? The original source, Plato, and the birth of the Atlantis story. Every great mystery has a beginning. For Atlantis, that beginning has a name: Plato. Plato was not a storyteller. He was not a poet. And he was not known for inventing myths without purpose. Plato was a philosopher, a student of Socrates, and the teacher of Aristotle. His ideas shaped Western philosophy, politics, ethics, and science for more than 2,000 years. When Plato wrote, people listened. And when Plato claimed something was history, it mattered. The story of Atlantis appears in two of Plato's works. The first is called Timaeus, the second is called Critias. These texts were written around 360 BCE. They take the form of a dialogue, a conversation between philosophers. At first glance, this may seem like fiction, but here is the key detail. Plato presents Atlantis not as a legend, not as a metaphor, but as a real historical account. He tells us exactly where the story comes from. According to Plato, the story of Atlantis was passed down through generations. It began in Egypt. Plato claims that Egyptian priests told the story to a Greek lawmaker named Solon. Solon then brought the story back to Greece, and it was preserved within Plato's family until he finally wrote it down. This matters because Egypt, in Plato's time, was considered ancient even by ancient standards. The Egyptian priest reportedly told Solon that Greece was young, that its history had been erased by floods and disasters, and that only Egypt had preserved records of civilizations that existed long before. Among those records, they said, was Atlantis. Plato does not hesitate. He gives dates. He claims Atlantis existed 9,000 years before his own time. That places Atlantis around 9,600 BCE, long before classical Greece, long before recorded European history. This date alone has fueled centuries of debate. Some scholars argue it makes the story impossible. Others say it suggests a lost prehistoric civilization. Plato continues with remarkable detail. He describes Atlantis as a powerful island empire, larger than Libya and Asia combined, as they were understood at the time. He says Atlantis lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. According to Plato, Atlantis controlled vast territories, both islands and parts of the mainland. Its navy dominated the seas. Its capital city was a marvel of engineering, and its society was once virtuous. This is crucial. Plato does not portray Atlantis as evil from the start. In fact, he says the Atlanteans were originally noble. They were guided by laws, by balance, by wisdom. But over time they changed. Their divine qualities faded, greed grew, power corrupted them. They began to desire domination, and that is when the gods intervened. Plato describes a catastrophic punishment: violent earthquakes, massive floods. In a single day and night, Atlantis disappeared, swallowed by the sea. And after that, Plato says, the ocean became impassable, filled with mud, shallow, unnavigable. This detail is fascinating because it suggests Plato wanted his audience to believe Atlantis left physical consequences, not just a story. Now here is the critical question. Did Plato believe Atlantis was real? Scholars have argued about this for centuries. Some believe Plato invented Atlantis as an allegory, a moral lesson about hubris and the fall of civilizations. Others argue that Plato was too precise to be making it all up. Why name locations? Why describe architecture? Why include timelines? Plato often used myths to illustrate ideas, but when he did, he usually made that clear. With Atlantis, he does not. In Critias, the story ends abruptly. The dialogue cuts off mid-sentence, as if Plato intended to continue the story, but never did. This unfinished ending has only deepened the mystery. If Atlantis was purely symbolic, why leave it incomplete? Why treat it with such seriousness? And why connect it to real historical figures like Solon? These questions have no definitive answers. What we do know is this: Plato's account is the only original source of Atlantis. There are no Egyptian records that mention it directly, no archaeological evidence that clearly confirms it. And yet, the story survived. It was copied, studied, debated. Medieval scholars discussed it. Renaissance thinkers revived it. Modern researchers still chase it, all because one philosopher decided to write it down. Whether Atlantis was real or symbolic, whether it was history or warning, Plato ensured it would never be forgotten. And that brings us to the next step, because if Atlantis existed, or if Plato believed it did, then what kind of place was it? What did this lost civilization actually look like, and why was it considered so powerful? That is where the story truly comes alive.